Before lamps, before candles, before glass chimneys and glowing bulbs, night was not something humans lit. It was something they entered. Darkness was not an inconvenience. It was not a problem waiting to be solved. It was simply the other half of the day. When the sun slipped below the horizon, the world did not try to stay awake. It exhaled. Fields faded into shadow. Paths disappeared into soft outlines. Colors drained from the land until everything became shades of deep blue and charcoal gray. And people followed the light. Without fire nearby, sight shrank quickly. Details dissolved. Movement slowed. The day had been for working, walking, gathering, building. The night was for stillness. Early humans did not expect to see clearly after sunset. They did not fill their homes with steady light. They did not push the dark away. They adjusted to it. Inside huts, caves, and simple dwellings, the fading daylight slipped through openings in the walls and roofs, lingering for a short while like a memory of the sun. Then even that gentle glow disappeared. The dark was not absolute. The moon and stars still offered a faint silver outline to the world. But indoors, shapes softened into shadow. Voices grew quieter. Movements became careful. In this low light, people learned a different way of sensing the world. Ears became more attentive. Hands moved slowly, memorizing familiar spaces. The crackle of a small fire or the rustle of fabric carried more meaning than distant sights ever could. Night was not empty. It was simply less visible. For most of human history, this was normal. Darkness signaled rest, not because of clocks, but because of limits. There was little that could be done once the sun had gone. Without artificial light, detailed tasks became difficult. Thread could not be seen clearly enough for sewing. Tools were too dangerous to use without sight. Travel risked injury on unseen paths. So people gathered. They sat closer together. They spoke more softly. Stories were told in voices shaped by firelight or moonlight. Not to fill silence, but to share presence. Children listened with wide, dark-adjusted eyes. Adults leaned back, letting the day's labor drain from their muscles. The night was not long because of boredom. It was long because there was nothing pushing it forward. Time stretched gently. Minutes were not measured. Hours were not counted. There was only the slow movement of stars across the sky, unnoticed by many, and the steady rhythm of breathing in rooms filled with sleeping forms. Without lamps, darkness defined the edges of human life. It drew a boundary around activity. It told the body when to slow down. And over generations, human sleep patterns shaped themselves around this rhythm. People did not always sleep in one long stretch, as many do today. Instead, historical evidence suggests that many cultures experience segmented sleep, 2 periods of rest separated by a quiet interval in the middle of the night. In that deep darkness, some would wake briefly. They would sit quietly, pray, think, listen to the wind. There was no rush to return to sleep, and no bright light to fully wake the mind. The dark held them gently between dreams. Outside, night animals moved through fields and forests with confidence humans did not share. Owls called, insects hummed, leaves shifted in unseen breezes. The world did not stop when humans closed their eyes. It simply changed its caretakers. Predators hunted, nocturnal creatures explored. Humans, without light, accepted their place as daytime beings. Darkness was not feared in the abstract. It was respected. It hid dangers, yes, uneven ground, wild animals, unknown terrain. But it also offered protection. Fires burned low and small to avoid drawing attention. Villages settled into quiet clusters of breathing bodies. From a distance, a settlement at night might appear as nothing more than a few faint embers glowing against the vastness of shadow. The sky, unobstructed by artificial glow, stretched brilliantly overhead. Stars were not decorations, they were companions. Constellations guided travelers and storytellers alike. The Milky Way cut across the sky like a pale river of light. Without lamps to compete with the heavens, night skies were deep, textured, alive. Children grew up knowing the patterns of stars the way modern children know streetlights. Darkness was not an absence, it was a canvas. Inside homes, the last traces of firelight flickered across walls, making shadows move in slow, unpredictable shapes. Faces became softer, less defined. Voices carried more weight than expressions. In these conditions, conversation slowed. There was no visual distraction pulling attention away. Words floated in warm air, rising and fading like sparks. Eventually, even the fire would be covered or allowed to dim. Fuel was precious. Light was a luxury. Sleep came not as a sudden switch, but as a gradual drifting. One person would lie down, another would finish a story. Someone would step outside briefly, returning guided by memory rather than sight. The dark room filled with the quiet sounds of settling bodies. Breath in, breath out. Night was not conquered, it was entered. There were no glowing windows in distant houses, no lanterns marking roads. Once the sun disappeared, the world narrowed to what could be sensed by ear, touch, and faint outlines of moonlit shapes. For thousands of years, this was humanity's relationship with darkness. Not something to be illuminated, something to live alongside. It shaped daily rhythms, social habits, sleep patterns, and even imagination. Dreams grew rich in worlds not seen by day. Stories filled the unseen spaces. Mystery was not rare. It was everywhere beyond the reach of sight. And when morning finally arrived, it did not simply brighten the sky. It reopened the world. Color returned. Distance expanded. Details sharpened. People stepped back into a visible landscape with renewed awareness. But the memory of night lingered. The softness, the quiet, the closeness of voices in the dark. Before lamps, humans did not fight the night. They moved with it. They trusted that rest belonged to darkness and activity to light. Only much later would people begin to carry small flames into the evening, pushing back the shadows a little at a time. But in this early world, before bowls of oil and hanging lanterns, darkness was not a lack. It was simply how night was meant to be. For thousands of years, humans accepted that night belonged to shadow. But slowly, quietly, something changed. Not a torch for walking, not a bonfire for warmth. Something smaller, something meant to stay in one place and glow gently beside human life. The first lamps were simple, so simple they almost seem obvious in hindsight. A shallow bowl, some oil or animal fat, a twisted fiber to carry the flame. That was all. Archaeologists have found some of the earliest known oil lamps dating back more than 10,000 years. Small stone or shell containers, hollowed just enough to hold a little fuel. They were not bright, they were not efficient, but they allowed humans to hold a piece of fire without tending a full blaze. This was a quiet revolution. Before lamps, fire meant a hearth, large, open, consuming wood and filling space with heat and smoke. Now light could be separated from warmth. A small, controlled flame could sit beside a person, casting a steady glow without turning the entire room into a furnace. Early fuels were whatever the environment provided. Animal fat from hunted creatures, fish oil near coasts and rivers, plant oils where seeds and nuts could be pressed. Each burned with a slightly different scent, a slightly different color of flame. The light was golden, low, and alive. Unlike modern bulbs, which shine steadily and without movement, an oil lamp's flame breathed with the air. It leaned, it flickered, it responded to the smallest shift in wind or breath. The light it cast was soft-edged. Shadows moved gently across walls, stretching and shrinking like slow creatures in the dark. In these early homes, caves, huts, mud brick rooms, a lamp did not push the night away. It carved out a small island of visibility, just enough to see hands, faces, the curve of a bowl, the thread of a needle. Beyond that small circle, darkness still ruled. But within it, the night felt less absolute. The lamp was not a symbol of conquest. It was a companion. People placed lamps close to where they sat, near a sleeping mat, beside a work surface, next to a place where food was prepared or tools repaired. The flame gave just enough light to continue quiet tasks after sunset, sewing, carving, sorting grains. Movement slowed to match the limits of sight. Nothing could be rushed in lamplight. Details were harder to see, edges softer. Patience grew naturally. The presence of a lamp also changed the emotional shape of night. Darkness was no longer something entered all at once. It was something gradually met, with a small flame standing between human presence and the vast shadow beyond. Families gathered around these little lights. Faces leaned inward, illuminated from below or the side, features shifting with every flicker. Stories continued a little longer into the evening. Conversations stretched gently past sunset. Children fell asleep watching the flame dance. Lamps also carried a certain responsibility. They could tip, spill, smoke. The scent of burning oil lingered in the air, mixing with the smells of earth, wood, and cooking fires. Walls darkened over time, marked by soot. And yet, despite the inconvenience, people kept them, because even a small light changes how a space feels. Where there is a lamp, there is a center, a place to gather, a place to return to after stepping into darkness outside. In many early cultures, lamps took on symbolic meaning. They represented life, presence, watchfulness. A flame left burning through the night suggested someone was awake. Someone was keeping vigil. In temples and sacred spaces, lamps burned continuously, small, steady lights marking places of importance and devotion. The technology itself remained simple for thousands of years. Stone bowls gave way to clay to shaped ceramics and metals. Wicks improved, fuels became more refined. But the basic idea never changed. A small container, a slow-burning liquid, a flame held just above the surface. Unlike torches or bonfires, oil lamps invited stillness. They were not for traveling. They were for staying, for sitting quietly with a book of clay tablets or parchment, for mending clothing while others slept, for keeping gentle watch through the quiet middle hours of the night. The world beyond the doorway remained vast and dark. Stars still shone brighter than any human flame. But inside, in that warm circle of light, the night became more intimate, not fully visible, not fully safe, but softened. The oil lamp did not end darkness. It changed humanity's relationship with it. Night was no longer only something endured or slept through. It became a time when small, careful activity could continue, a time for reflection, conversation, quiet work. The flame's movement had a calming rhythm. Eyes followed its gentle sway. thoughts slow to match. Even today, the glow of a candle or oil lamp feels different from electric light, more alive, more personal. It connects us to a time when light was rare, precious, and always slightly fragile. A time when a small bowl of fire was enough to hold back the vastness of night, just a little. As centuries passed, the small, simple bowl of flame began to take on new shapes. In the lands around the Mediterranean, where evenings were long, stone houses held the day's warmth, and life often continued after sunset. Oil lamps became part of ordinary existence. In ancient Greece, and later in Rome, lamps were no longer just improvised containers. They were crafted, shaped with care from clay, bronze, and sometimes even glass. These lamps reflected both practical need and quiet artistry. A typical Greek oil lamp was small enough to hold in one hand. It had a rounded body to hold the oil, a narrow spout where the wick emerged, and often a small handle or loop at the back. The shape was elegant without trying to be, designed not for display, but for daily use. When filled with olive oil, abundant in the Mediterranean world, the lamp produced a steady golden flame. Olive oil burned cleaner than many animal fats, with less smoke and a softer scent. Its light was gentle and warm, well suited to stone rooms and plastered walls. In Roman homes, lamps were everywhere. They stood on low tables, rested in wall niches, hung from chains in courtyards and entryways. Large houses might have many lamps, each marking a small island of light within larger spaces. A dining room would glow with several small flames placed around the couches where guests reclined. A hallway might have just one, enough to guide careful steps. Bedrooms held a single lamp placed low, near the sleeping area, casting long shadows across textured walls. The light of these lamps was never bright enough to erase darkness. Instead, it sculpted it. Corners remained in shadow. Ceilings faded upward into dimness. Rooms felt smaller at night, more enclosed, more intimate, and within this softened space, evening life unfolded. After sunset, when the heat of the day eased, people gathered in lamplight. They talked, ate, played games, listened to music played on lyres or flutes. The pace of life slowed, guided by the limits of sight. Fine detail work was difficult, so activities shifted toward the social and the reflective. The lamp was often placed at the center of these gatherings. Its flame drew the eye. Its warmth, though slight, felt comforting. Children watched the flicker while adults spoke. Hands gestured through shifting light, casting large shadows that moved gently along walls. In wealthier Roman homes, lamps became more decorative. Bronze lamps were shaped like animals, leaves, or mythological figures. Some had multiple spouts, allowing several flames to burn at once, increasing the light in larger rooms. Chains suspended lamps from ceilings, where they swayed almost imperceptibly in moving air, causing shadows to drift slowly across painted frescoes. Despite these variations, the function remained humble: to hold a small amount of oil, to carry a wick, to offer light without demanding attention. In temples and sacred spaces, lamps had a deeper presence. Flames were kept burning before statues of gods, their steady glow symbolizing continuity, watchfulness, and devotion. Priests and attendants tended these lights carefully, trimming wicks and refilling oil to keep the flame alive through the night. The lamp became a sign of presence, not only human, but divine. In these quiet sanctuaries, the soft flicker of oil lamps reflected off polished stone and metal, creating an atmosphere of stillness and reverence. But most lamps lived in ordinary rooms, kitchens, workshops, sleeping areas. They lit meals prepared after dusk, guided hands shaping clay or weaving fabric, illuminated scrolls unrolled for evening reading. Scholars and scribes depended on lamplight to continue their work beyond sunset. In the gentle glow, letters were copied, accounts recorded, poems composed. The light was never perfect. Eyes strained, shadows obscured edges, but the lamp extended the day just enough to allow thought and creation to continue into the quiet hours. Walking through a Roman street at night would have been a different experience from the modern city. There were no rows of bright lamps lining the roads. Instead, small lights appeared sporadically. A glow from an open doorway, a lamp hanging in a tavern, a lantern carried by a passerby. Between these pockets of light lay stretches of shadow, where the outlines of buildings softened and the sky above remained full of stars. The rhythm of night was not erased by lamps. It was gently punctuated. People moved more slowly, aware of uneven ground and unseen obstacles. Voices carried farther in the cooler air. The world felt quieter, more contained. Inside homes, the lamp often marked the final moments before sleep. Its flame burned low as conversations faded. Someone would lean forward, pinch the wick between damp fingers, or use a small tool to extinguish it. Smoke curled briefly into the air, carrying the scent of burnt oil. Darkness returned, full and soft. In this cycle, lighting the lamp at dusk, extinguishing it at night, daily life followed the sun while still allowing space for evening thought and connection. The lamp did not conquer night. It created a dialogue with it, light and shadow sharing space. In Greece and Rome, this relationship between humans and small, controlled flame became deeply familiar. Children grew up watching lamps being lit at dusk, learning to trim wicks, understanding how much oil was needed for a few hours of light. These gestures became part of the daily rhythm, as natural as closing doors or laying out bedding. The presence of the lamp also shaped imagination. In low light, forms seemed softer, less defined. Stories told in these conditions carried a different tone, more intimate, more mysterious. Myths and histories shared in lamplight felt closer, as if the flickering shadows themselves listened. Artists, too, responded to lamplight. Frescoes and mosaics were designed to be seen in shifting illumination, colors deepening and softening as flames moved. Metal objects gleamed warmly. Stone appeared almost alive. Even today, standing in the ruins of an ancient house, one can imagine the glow of small lamps against painted walls, the quiet murmur of voices, the slow drift of smoke upward toward darkened ceilings. The technology itself did not change dramatically for centuries. Better clay, more refined shapes, improved wicks, but always the same principle. A small pool of oil, a thread of fiber, a flame held carefully in place. And in that modest light, human life continued past sunset, not brightly, not loudly, but gently. The lamps of Greece and Rome did not banish the night. They made it livable. They allowed evenings to stretch just a little longer, conversations to linger, thoughts to settle. A small sun, cradled in the palm of human hands, glowing quietly against the vast and patient dark. As the classical world faded and centuries shifted, the small oil lamp remained. Empires changed, languages evolved, cities rose and fell. But when night came, people still turned to a small, steady flame. In medieval Europe, darkness shaped life even more deeply than before. Most homes had little glass in their windows. Walls were thick. Rooms were dim even during the day. When the sun set, interiors quickly slipped into shadow. The night returned to being something vast and enclosing. But within monasteries, quiet communities devoted to prayer, study, and routine, lamplight took on a special role. Monastic life followed a rhythm unlike that of villages or towns. Time was not divided by markets or travel, but by bells and prayers. And some of those prayers belonged to the night. Monks often rose long before dawn for services known as vigils or matins. In the deep hours before sunrise, when the world outside lay silent under stars, figures in simple robes moved quietly through cold stone corridors. Their way was lit not by torches, but by small lamps and candles. Oil lamps, much like those of earlier centuries, still burned in these spaces. Simple clay or metal containers filled with oil, their wicks trimmed carefully by practiced hands. Their light flickered against stone walls, soft and golden, barely strong enough to push back the vast darkness of vaulted ceilings. In these monasteries, silence was not merely the absence of sound, it was a presence in itself. Footsteps echoed faintly on flagstones. Fabric brushed softly as monks walked, and above it all, the small flames glowed steadily, marking paths through shadow. The lamps were placed with intention, near doorways, along staircases, beside lecterns in chapels. They were not meant to brighten the space fully, only to guide, to suggest form without revealing everything. In scriptoria, the rooms where manuscripts were copied by hand, lamplight played another role. Here, monks and scribes leaned over wooden desks, their work slow and deliberate. Before the printing press, every book was made by hand, each letter formed carefully with ink and quill, each page illuminated with color and gold leaf. This work often extended into evening hours, especially in winter when daylight was short. A lamp placed close to the writing surface cast a concentrated glow, allowing letters to be seen against parchment. But the rest of the room remained dim. Other figures appeared as silhouettes at their desks, heads bent, hands moving slowly. The air smelled of oil, parchment, and ink. And in that soft circle of light, knowledge was preserved. Texts of philosophy, theology, medicine, poetry, copied line by people who worked mostly in silence. The lamp did not just illuminate the page. It shaped the pace of work. Movements had to be slow to avoid knocking the flame. Eyes tired easily in the dim light. Breaks were frequent. The night, even when lit, insisted on gentleness. Beyond monasteries, medieval homes also used small lamps and candles, though often more sparingly. Fuel was costly. Light was precious. In cottages and small houses, a single flame might serve an entire room. Families gathered close to it, hands extended toward the warmth of a nearby hearth, while the lamp offered just enough light to see faces and simple tasks. The flame became the center of evening life. Stories were told in its glow. Wool was spun, clothes were mended. Children watched the flame as they grew sleepy, its movements slow and mesmerizing. But once the oil or tallow was gone, darkness returned quickly. The medieval night was still long and deep. Street lighting was rare or non-existent in most towns. After curfew bells rang, people stayed indoors. The world outside shrank to the reach of moonlight and memory. And in this darkness, lamps had another quiet function. They offered reassurance. A light in a window meant someone was awake, someone was keeping watch, someone else existed beyond the silence. In castles and larger estates, lamps lit corridors and chambers, but always in limited numbers. Servants moved carefully, carrying small lights from room to room. Flames reflected off metal armor, off polished wood, off tapestries that seemed to move as shadows danced across them. Even in these grand settings, light remained localized, intimate. The medieval imagination grew in this interplay of shadow and glow. Stories of saints, visions, and miracles were often told by lamplight, the flickering flame making the unseen feel close. Faces appeared and disappeared in shifting shadow. The boundary between the visible and invisible felt thin. Lamps in churches burned before altars, small steady flames marking sacred presence. These lights were tended with care, sometimes kept burning day and night. Their constancy symbolized faith, watchfulness, and continuity through darkness. In long stone naves, the small flames seemed almost fragile against the vast arches. Yet they endured, night after night, winter after winter, through storms, wars, and quiet years alike. The medieval lamp did not brighten the world. It created pockets of humanity within it, small spaces where hands could work, eyes could read, voices could speak softly without being swallowed by the night. And always, the light was alive, moving, breathing, never perfectly steady. The flicker itself became part of the atmosphere, part of the rhythm of evening life. In the deep hours before dawn, when monks returned to their beds after prayer, lamps were extinguished one by one. Wicks pinched, flames dimmed, smoke curled upward in thin grey threads. Darkness returned fully, patient and complete, until the next evening, when once again a small flame would be coaxed into life, and human presence would gather around it, gently, quietly, within the great and endless night. For centuries, light belonged mostly indoors. A flame near a table, a lamp beside a bed, a candle in a chapel alcove. But outside, the night still stretched wide and unbroken. Streets after sunset were not meant for wandering. Paths disappeared into shadow. Houses became dark shapes. Footsteps sounded louder in the quiet air. The medieval and early modern night was something people moved through carefully, if at all. Yet slowly, in some towns and cities, a new kind of light began to appear, not to banish the darkness, but to punctuate it. Lanterns. Unlike open lamps, lanterns enclosed the flame. Glass or thin horn panels shielded the fire from wind, allowing a small, steady glow to travel with a person, or hang in place along a street. Early street lighting did not look like rows of evenly spaced lamps stretching into the distance. It was irregular, sparse, a single lantern near a gate, another at a crossroads, perhaps one outside a tavern or watchpost. Each one created a small pool of light surrounded by deep shadow. Between them lay stretches of near total darkness. In many towns, the first street lanterns were not permanent fixtures. They were carried. Night watchmen walked slowly through quiet streets, with lanterns swinging gently from their hands. Their role was not only to see, but to be seen, a moving point of light marking safety, presence, and order. The lantern light rocked with each step, causing shadows to shift and walls to ripple with motion. Footsteps echoed softly on stone or packed earth. The watchman's lantern did not brighten the whole street. It illuminated a few steps ahead and left the rest to imagination. In larger cities, authorities began to experiment with fixed lanterns. By the 17th century, places like Paris and London saw early attempts at organized street lighting. Lanterns were hung from poles or brackets attached to buildings. Some were lit by oil, others by candles placed inside protective casings. Their glow was faint compared to modern lights, a soft yellow halo. barely strong enough to show the edge of a doorway or the curve of a cart's wheel. But even this small change altered the feeling of night. The street was no longer completely unknown. A traveler could walk from one pool of light to another, moving slowly through alternating bands of glow and shadow. Each lantern became a point of orientation, a landmark in the dark. Lantern light changed how the city sounded too. Before street lighting, night amplified every noise: footsteps, voices, distant doors closing. With lanterns present, even sparsely, night felt a little more inhabited. A person could glimpse another figure ahead, see the faint outline of a horse or cart, notice a doorway before reaching it, yet darkness still dominated. Most of the street remained in shadow. Roofs disappeared into blackness. Alleys stayed mysterious. The lantern did not erase the medieval night. It softened its edges. Inside the lantern itself, the flame flickered much like the oil lamps of homes and monasteries. But the glass panels changed the quality of the light. It became more focused, more contained. The glow felt less like a hearth and more like a guide. On foggy nights, lantern lights spread into the mist, creating soft halos suspended in the air. Moisture caught the glow and turned streets into shifting layers of brightness and shadow. Rain turned cobblestones reflective, doubling the light in shimmering pools beneath each lantern. In winter, when evenings came early, these small lights offered reassurance to those who still needed to move through town. A baker rising before dawn, a traveler arriving late, a guard changing posts. The lantern marked human presence in a world that otherwise belonged to the dark. There was also a social change. Before lanterns, night encouraged stillness and retreat indoors. With even a little light outside, some evening activity extended later. Markets did not reopen, and work did not resume in full, but movement became slightly less risky. Taverns glowed more visibly from the street. Doorways became easier to find. The night grew a little less silent. Still, lighting the streets was labor. Each lantern had to be filled, lit, and maintained. Watchmen or hired workers moved from one to the next at dusk, carrying flames from lantern to lantern like a chain of small suns. At dawn, they returned to extinguish them. If the weather turned harsh or funds ran short, lanterns might not be lit at all. Darkness would reclaim the streets entirely. So the early era of street lanterns was not consistent. Some nights were brighter than others. Some towns glowed faintly while others remained unchanged. But wherever a lantern hung, it transformed its immediate space. It created a place where the eye could rest, where shapes became readable, where the night felt just slightly less vast. Standing beneath one of these early lanterns, a person might look up and see the flame trembling behind glass, small and alive. Beyond it, stars still burned overhead, far brighter and far more numerous. The human light did not compete with the sky. It existed alongside it, a modest echo of the greater lights above. Lanterns in the streets marked a quiet turning point. Light was no longer only private, contained within walls. It began to belong, cautiously, to shared spaces. Not enough to conquer the night, just enough to trace a path through it. A step here, another there, from one small circle of glow to the next. For much of history, light after sunset came from flame, and flame meant fuel. Before gas lines and electric wires, before switches and bulbs, illumination depended on what could be burned, slowly, safely, and with some degree of control. This was the long age of candles and oil. In homes across Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and beyond, evenings unfolded in the glow of small lights that had to be made, tended, and carefully preserved. Candles, simple in appearance, carried quiet complexity. Early candles were often made from animal fat, tallow rendered from cattle or sheep. The process was practical and domestic. Fat was melted, filtered, and poured or dipped around a wick, layer by layer, until a thick cylinder formed. These tallow candles were smoky and carried a noticeable scent, especially when burned indoors. But they were affordable and widely available, especially in rural households. In wealthier homes, beeswax candles offered a cleaner alternative. Beeswax burned brighter and with less smoke, releasing a faint, honeyed scent into the air. But beeswax was costly, the product of patient labor by bees and beekeepers. Thus, wax candles often appeared in churches, manor houses, and formal spaces, where their steady, golden light marked importance and ceremony. Meanwhile, oil lamps continued their quiet presence, fueled by olive oil in Mediterranean regions, by sesame or mustard oil in parts of Asia, and by animal fats or plant oils elsewhere. Each region burned what the land offered. The quality of light varied. Some flames were steadier, some more fragrant, some dimmer. But everywhere, the rhythm was the same. Evening came, light was prepared. Lighting a candle or lamp was an intentional act. There was no switch to press. A flame had to be borrowed from another flame, from the hearth, from a neighbor's light, from a carefully preserved ember. Fire was shared. Once lit, candles and lamps required attention. Wicks had to be trimmed to prevent smoking. Oil refilled before it ran dry. A careless bump could tip a lamp. A draught could cause a candle to gutter and flicker. Light was never taken for granted. It was a living presence in the room. In cottages and townhouses alike, the evening often began with the lighting of one or two small flames. Rooms that had seemed grey in fading daylight warmed into amber tones. Wood grain deepened, textiles glowed softly, faces emerged from shadow, but the light remained localized. One candle might illuminate a table where people sat together. Beyond that circle, darkness gathered in corners, along ceilings, under benches. The eye adjusted, learning to move between light and shadow. The pace of life followed the pace of flame. Candles burned down gradually, their shortening length a quiet measure of time. One candle might last a few hours. When it grew low, people began to prepare for sleep. Light was expensive. Even the wealthy avoided waste. Candlesticks were designed to catch dripping wax, which could be melted and reused. Snuffers extinguished flames without smoke, preserving wicks for another night. In many homes, only one candle would be carried from room to room, its small glow traveling with the person who needed it most. Imagine a medieval or early modern household at dusk. The day's work has ended. A single candle stands on the table. Someone spins wool beside it, hands moving slowly. Another person reads from a worn book, holding it close to the flame. A child sits nearby, tracing shadows with curious eyes. The rest of the room fades into quiet obscurity. Outside, the night deepens, but inside, this small flame defines a shared space. Conversations soften in candlelight. Voices drop instinctively, as if not to disturb the fragile glow. Stories are told in this half-light, their details shaped by imagination as much as sight. The candle does not reveal everything. It invites closeness. Oil lamps added a slightly different quality. Their flame often burned lower and broader than a candle's, with a steady glow that seemed to breathe gently. In kitchens and workshops, lamps offered a practical light for finishing tasks after sunset. But still, movements had to be careful. Tools looked sharper in shadow. Hands worked by feel as much as sight. In cities, the glow of candles and oil lamps appeared in windows after dark. Walking down a street at night, a person might see scattered points of warm light, each marking a home where life continued quietly. These lights were not bright enough to illuminate the road, but they signaled presence, human warmth against the cool vastness of night. Candles also shaped ritual and religion. In churches, rows of small flames burned before altars, their collective light soft and reverent. Each candle represented prayer, memory, devotion. The act of lighting one carried meaning beyond illumination. Light became symbolic of hope, of life, of watchfulness through darkness. The age of candles and oil was not an era of bright nights. It was an era of intentional light. Every flame had a purpose: to read a page, to mend a garment, to guide a step. When no purpose remained, the flame was extinguished, and darkness returned naturally. This cycle, light, work, rest, dark, kept human life aligned with the rhythms of day and night. Sleep came earlier. Evenings were shorter. Yet they felt full of conversation, of quiet tasks, of shared presence around a small glowing center. The limitations of light encouraged togetherness. People gathered where the flame was. They did not scatter into separate, brightly lit rooms. They shared space, warmth, and time. Eventually, new fuels would brighten nights further. Whale oil, gas, and later electricity would stretch evening into something almost indistinguishable from day. But in this long age of candles and oil, light remained humble, a small, trembling flame, enough to see a face, enough to finish a thought, enough to make the night feel gentle rather than endless. And when the last candle burned low and the wick curled into darkness, the room would exhale. The flame gone, shadows settled fully. Night reclaimed its space. Until the next evening, someone would once again strike a spark and invite a small piece of fire to sit quietly beside them in the dark. For centuries, candles and simple oil lamps gave humans a modest glow, enough to soften the dark, but not enough to change it. Then, in the early modern era, a new source of fuel began to brighten evenings in ways people had not known before. Whale oil. Harvested from the great whales of the oceans, this oil burned cleaner and brighter than many earlier fuels. It produced a steadier flame, less smoky than tallow, and often stronger than common vegetable oils. Where it was available, rooms could be lit more clearly for longer periods. The change did not happen everywhere at once. Whale oil was costly and tied to dangerous voyages at sea. But in port cities and wealthier households of Europe and North America, its light began to alter the feeling of night indoors. Lamps designed for whale oil often had glass chimneys, slender cylinders placed around the flame. These chimneys did two things. They protected the flame from drafts, and they improved the airflow, making the light burn brighter and more steadily. The result was a clearer, whiter glow, still warm, still flickering gently, but stronger than before. Shadows retreated a little farther into corners. Details in a room became easier to see. Evening activities expanded. Reading grew more comfortable. Fine sewing could continue later. Writing letters after sunset became less tiring for the eyes. Rooms felt more open, less enclosed by darkness. Yet the light remained local. One lamp might illuminate a table or a desk, but not an entire house. To move from room to room still meant carrying a light or stepping into shadow. Whale oil did not conquer the night. It extended the reach of human vision within it. In cities like London, Boston, and Amsterdam, whale oil lamps appeared in homes, workshops, and sometimes in street lanterns. Merchants, scholars, and artisans appreciated the brighter flame. Shops could stay open later during winter months. Workshops could finish delicate tasks after dusk. But with this brightness came a subtle shift in daily rhythm. Evenings lengthened. People stayed awake a little longer. The clear boundary between day and night began, just slightly, to blur. Still, there was effort involved. Whale oil lamps required maintenance. The wick had to be trimmed regularly, the glass chimney cleaned of soot. The lamp had to be refilled with care, the precious oil poured slowly from heavy containers. Nothing about this light was effortless. It was valued, conserved, respected. The source of the oil itself added a quiet weight to its use. Whaling was a long and perilous endeavor. Ships left ports for months or even years, chasing massive animals across cold oceans. Crews worked in harsh conditions, processing blubber into oil aboard their vessels. The light that glowed gently in a study or dining room had traveled far. It carried the labor of sailors, the risk of storms, the vastness of the sea. Yet inside a home, the lamp told a different story. It spoke of comfort, of longer evenings, of clearer pages, of gatherings that lingered a little past sunset. The glow of a whale oil lamp was steady enough to create a calm, reassuring atmosphere. Unlike a candle that might gutter quickly, the lamp could burn for hours with consistent brightness. Families could dine in a more evenly lit room. Guests could converse without leaning so close to the flame. Musicians could see their instruments more clearly. Still, outside the windows, night remained dark. The sky, unchallenged by artificial glare, held its stars. Streets, unless specifically lit, stayed dim and quiet. Whale oil's influence was mostly indoors, within private spaces where light shaped the mood of evening life. There was also a sensory difference. Whale oil lamps had a faint, distinctive smell, less sharp than tallow, more neutral than some plant oils. The glass chimney muffled some of the flicker, making the flame feel calmer, more contained. The room felt steadier, as if the light itself had become more reliable. This reliability encouraged new habits. People began to schedule evening reading, correspondence, and indoor social activities with more confidence. The lamp would not suddenly fail, as a small candle might. It offered a dependable glow, a quiet partner in late-hour tasks. Yet the darkness beyond the lamp still mattered. It framed the light, gave it meaning. Without that surrounding shadow, the brightness would not have felt so welcoming. As the 18th and early 19th centuries progressed, whale oil became one of the primary fuels for illumination in many parts of the Western world. Its use marked a transition, a step between the intimate, flickering light of candles and the broader, more industrial light that would soon follow. But even at its brightest, the whale oil lamp remained a flame, alive, responsive to air, dependent on care. It did not hum with wires or glow from hidden filaments. It burned, and in that living flame, people still felt connected to older rhythms of light and dark. The lamp stood on a desk, its glass chimney glowing softly. Outside, wind moved through trees. Inside, a page turned. Time moved gently forward, measured not by clocks alone, but by the slow lowering of a wick, and the quiet dimming of oil. When the fuel ran low, someone would rise, adjust the lamp, or finally extinguish it. The chimney would darken. The room would soften back into shadow. Night, patient and vast, waited just beyond the reach of the brighter flame, ready to fill the space once more. For thousands of years, light had been small, a flame in a bowl, a candle on a table, a lantern swaying in a watchman's hand. Even whale oil, brighter than earlier fuels, remained local, a glow contained within a room. Then, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, a new kind of light began to flow through pipes beneath city streets. Gas, manufactured from coal and distributed through underground networks, gas could feed lamps that burned brighter and more steadily than oil or tallow. For the first time, large areas of a city could be lit at once. The change was gradual at first. A few lamps installed along a main street, a cluster around a marketplace, lights near theaters and public buildings. Each gas lamp stood atop an iron post, its flame enclosed in glass, fed continuously by a hidden supply. Lamplighters moved through the streets at dusk, carrying long poles with small flames at the end. One by one, they ignited each lamp, creating a slow wave of light rolling through the city. The sight was quiet and almost ceremonial. A dark street, a lamplighter approaching, a soft flare as the gas caught, then a steady glow where there had been none. These lamps burned brighter than anything most people had known outdoors. Not daylight, but enough to clearly see the street, the edge of the sidewalk, the faces of passers-by. Shadows still existed, but they were thinner, less absolute. The night began to change its character. Shops could stay open later, their windows lit from inside and visible from the street. Theaters and cafes drew evening crowds. Carriages moved more confidently after sunset. The city began to hum longer into the night. And yet, gaslight was not harsh. Its glow was soft and slightly golden, flickering gently like all flame. It did not glare. It did not flatten the world into sharp brightness. Instead, it created a dreamlike atmosphere. Streets washed in warm halos, buildings emerging softly from shadow. On foggy nights, gas lamps transformed the air itself. Mist caught the light, turning each lamp into a glowing sphere suspended in haze. Streets became corridors of floating orbs, stretching into the distance. Footsteps echoed differently in this new brightness. Voices carried through lit spaces, blending with the hiss of gas and the faint clatter of wheels. The city did not become loud overnight, but it did become more awake. Night workers, bakers, printers, porters found their tasks easier under street lighting. Police and watchmen could see farther. Travel felt less uncertain. Still, gaslight required care. Pipes could leak. Flames could flicker in strong winds. Each morning, lamplighters returned to extinguish the lights, using their poles to gently close the flow of gas. The city dimmed again as daylight rose, the artificial glow retreating before the sun. Inside homes, gas lighting also began to replace oil lamps. Fixtures attached to walls or ceilings burned with multiple small flames, brightening entire rooms. Dinner tables gleamed. Mirrors reflected layers of light. People could gather in larger groups without crowding around a single candle. Evening life expanded. Conversations continued later. Reading became easier. Music and games stretched into hours once reserved for sleep. Yet the presence of flame remained. Gas lamps still flickered. They still carried warmth, movement, life. The light felt alive, not mechanical. It breathed with the room. But there was also a subtle shift in perception. Where once night had been something to accept and move within cautiously, it now seemed something that could be shaped, extended, partially controlled. The phrase, "the city that never slept," began to make sense in places where gaslight lined the streets. The boundary between day and night softened. People lingered outdoors longer. Late-night walks became possible. Public spaces remained active past sunset. Still, beyond the glow of lamps, darkness remained. Side streets and alleys often lay in shadow. Parks and fields beyond city edges stayed dim. The stars above were still visible, though slightly dimmed by rising urban glow. Gaslight did not erase the night. It redefined the relationship between human activity and darkness. Instead of retreating fully indoors, people began to share the evening city. Streets took on a different personality after dark. Quieter than day, yet no longer empty. Shadows longer, yet no longer all-consuming. Standing beneath a gas lamp in the 19th century, a person might look up at the flame dancing within glass, its glow steady and reassuring. Beyond it, the sky still stretched vast and black. The lamp did not compete with the stars. It created a human-scale light beneath them, warm, flickering, alive. And as more lamps appeared, block by block, the night grew gentler in cities, not conquered, not banished, but illuminated enough that life could continue, softly, well past sunset, under a canopy of glowing flames that turned darkness into something shared rather than feared. For thousands of years, every light humans knew had been alive, a flame that flickered, a wick that shortened, fuel that slowly disappeared. Light had movement, scent, warmth. It breathed with the air and dimmed when neglected. Then, in the late 19th century, something astonishing appeared. Light without fire. No wick, no oil, no smoke curling toward the ceiling. Just a small glass bulb, glowing steadily from within. When inventors such as Thomas Edison and others refined practical electric lighting, they did more than improve brightness. They changed the nature of night. Electric light did not flicker in drafts. It did not need trimming or refilling. It did not fill rooms with scent or soot. It simply turned on. For the first time in history, light could be summoned instantly, bright, reliable, and continuous. Early electric lamps were not yet everywhere. They appeared first in city centers, factories, theaters, and the homes of the wealthy. But even in these early spaces, the difference was striking. Rooms that once held soft pools of flickering glow were now evenly lit. Ceilings became visible. Corners lost their shadows. Details that had been hidden at night suddenly appeared as clearly as they did during the day. The atmosphere of evening began to change. With flame-based light, night always felt like night. Even in a bright oil or gas-lit room, the glow remained warm and limited, surrounded by darkness beyond the walls. Electric light, however, pushed back the dark more completely. It felt less like an island in shadow and more like a continuation of daylight. Factories embraced this change quickly. Work could continue long after sunset without the hazards of open flames. Machines operated under steady brightness. Night shifts became more common. Time, once governed by sunrise and sunset, began to follow clocks more strictly than light. Cities changed too. Electric streetlights replaced gas lamps, shining brighter and whiter. Rows of light stretched along avenues, illuminating entire districts. The night sky above cities began to fade, stars dimmed by the growing glow from below. People could walk safely at hours once reserved for sleep. Shops extended their hours. Cafes remained open later. The rhythm of the city stretched further into the dark. Inside homes, electric lamps brought a new convenience. A switch replaced the careful ritual of lighting a wick. No need to store fuel. No need to clean soot from glass chimneys. A room could be brightened in an instant. Yet with this convenience came a subtle loss. The electric bulb's light was steady, but still, it did not move like flame. It did not breathe. Its brightness was practical, but less intimate. Shadows, once soft and shifting, became sharper or disappeared entirely. Evenings grew longer. People stayed awake later, reading, working, entertaining under reliable light. The clear boundary between day and night blurred further. Darkness became something that could be postponed. Still, early electric light had its own atmosphere. Bulbs glowed with a warm amber tone, softer than many modern lights. Fixtures often had fabric shades or frosted glass, diffusing the glow. Rooms could still feel cozy, just brighter than before. The sound of electricity was subtle but present. A faint hum, a quiet click of a switch. Light had become mechanical. Invisible currents flowed through wires hidden in walls, carrying energy across distances without flame or fuel. This was a different kind of magic. Not fire held in a bowl, but light born from motion inside unseen circuits. For some, electric light felt almost unnatural at first, too bright, too steady. Yet its convenience was undeniable. Hospitals, schools, offices, and homes adopted it steadily. Cities grew brighter year by year. Nighttime streets, once marked by pools of gaslight, became evenly lit corridors. The darkness between lamps shrank. The sky above urban centers glowed faintly, a halo of human-made brightness. For the first time, people could move through much of the night with the same confidence they had during the day. This changed sleep, work, and social life. Bedtimes grew later. Shifts extended. Evening entertainment flourished. But somewhere in this transformation, night itself became quieter in a different way. Not silent, but less mysterious, less shadowed, less filled with unseen spaces. Electric light did not flicker or fade. It did not remind people gently that darkness would return. It suggested, instead, that night could be held at bay. And yet, in many homes, even as electric light spread, people still chose softer light for late hours. A small lamp with a shade, a single bulb glowing in a corner. Because even in the age of electricity, the human mind still responded to gentle illumination, still preferred a warm pool of light for reading, thinking, winding down. The electric lamp changed everything: industry, cities, daily schedules. But in quiet rooms at the end of the day, its glow often returned to something familiar, a small, steady light against surrounding dimness, a modern echo of the ancient flame, different in source, similar in feeling, light that allowed the night to remain gentle rather than disappear completely. After the spread of electric light, the world grew brighter than anyone in the age of candles or oil could have imagined. Cities glowed, factories ran through the night, streets shone with rows of steady bulbs. But inside a quiet home, long after the noise of the day has faded, light often returns to something much simpler: a single lamp, not the ceiling lights, not the brightness of a whole room, just one small pool of glow beside a chair, a bed, or a desk. In the late evening, people often choose less light, not more. They turn off the overhead brightness. They leave only a table lamp, its shade softening the bulb inside. The room shrinks again, as it once did in the days of flame. Corners fade into shadow. Ceilings disappear into darkness. The lamp becomes a quiet center, a place for reading a few more pages, for thinking, for sitting without doing anything at all. Its light is steady, unlike a candle, yet its effect is similar. It draws attention inward. It slows the mind. Outside the window, the modern world may still hum. Distant traffic, the faint glow of streetlights, the soft presence of a city that never fully sleeps. But in this room, the atmosphere feels older. The single lamp creates a boundary between the wide, bright world and the small, quiet space of evening. Hands move more slowly in this light. Pages turn with soft sounds. Shadows fall gently across the floor and walls, reminding the eye that not everything needs to be seen clearly. The lamp is not only practical, it is emotional. It signals the end of activity, the beginning of rest. People instinctively dim the lights before sleep, just as their ancestors once let candles burn low. The body responds to softer light. Breathing deepens. Thoughts untangle. A single lamp at night is not about conquering darkness. It is about shaping it, allowing enough light to feel safe, yet enough shadow to feel calm. In bedrooms, bedside lamps glow quietly as someone reads the last lines of a book. The lamp's light pools on the page, while the rest of the room drifts toward invisibility. When the book closes, the lamp is switched off with a soft click. Darkness returns smoothly, not as an interruption, but as a continuation. In living rooms, a lamp left on in a corner may glow long after others have gone to bed. It casts a warm shape against the wall, a quiet reminder that the space still exists in the dark. Some people leave such a lamp on deliberately, a small light against loneliness, a gentle presence through the night. In this way, modern light circles back to its origins. Though powered by wires and currents instead of oil or wax, the purpose feels familiar. A small, contained glow in a quiet room. Enough to read, enough to sit, enough to feel at ease. The electric age did not erase our need for gentle light. It simply gave us more ways to choose it. After centuries of brighter nights and longer hours, we still return, at the end of the day, to something modest. One lamp, one chair, one moment of stillness. Beyond its glow, darkness waits patiently. Not an enemy, not a problem, just the other half of the world. And as sleep approaches, the lamp becomes the final companion of waking thought. Its shade softens the bulb's brightness. Its circle of light narrows. The room quiets. At last, a hand reaches out. A switch clicks. The glow disappears. And the night, ancient and familiar, gently takes its place once more.